लेविग्नी थे, इनकी मिसेस लेडना से कैसी इक्वेशन थी। तो इसने ये बोला कि भाई देखो, फादर लेविग्नी और मिसेस लेडना जो थे, दे यूज्ड टू टॉक, पर वो फ्रेंच में बात करते, मुझे फ्रेंच ज़्यादा आती नहीं है। पर एक बार फादर लेविग्नी ने ये बोला था कि मिसेस लेडना बहुत डेंजरस औरत है।
अच्छा, वो फ्रेंच थे क्या?
हाँ, फ्रेंच थे ना। और तब तक डॉक्टर रेली जो थे अपने वो पेशेंट्स को देखने चले गए थे, ठीक है ना। And Mrs. Mercado faintly hated her ass. And Mr. Mercado, अब ये बात है Mrs. Mercado, Mrs. Mercado के. He was a bit soft on her, I said. I shouldn't think women, apart from his wife, have ever taken much notice of him. मतलब मिस्टर मर्कादो जो थे मिसेस लेडनर को पसंद करते थे, बट मिसेस मर्कादो नहीं पसंद करती थी. And Mrs. Nadler had a nice way of being interested in people and things they told her. It rather went into the poor man's head. मिसेस लेडनर का यह था कि वो इंटरेस्ट लेती थी, the poor man's head, ऐसा, ठीक है. And Mrs. Mercado, she was not pleased. Mrs. Mercado खुश नहीं थी. She was just plain jealous. That's the truth of it. You've got to be very careful when there's a husband and wife about, and that's a fact. I could tell you some surprising things. You have no idea the extraordinary things women get into their heads when it's the question of their husband. जब husband का मामला आता है तो women are very very protective. They can be very very aggressive on that. I do not doubt the truth of what you say. So Mrs. Mercado was jealous and she hated Mrs. Leidner. I've seen her look as though she'd have liked to kill her. Oh gracious, I pulled myself. Indeed, Mercupal, I didn't mean to say. I mean, that is not for one moment. No, not quite. I quite understand. The phrase slipped out, a very convenient one. And that Mrs. Leidner, she was worried by this animosity of Mrs. Mercado's. मिसेस लाइडनर क्या परेशान थी मिसेस मर्कादो की जो नफरत करती थी, उससे क्या वो परेशान थी क्या? Well, I said, reflecting, I don't really think she was worried at all. In fact, I don't, I thought of just giving her a hint, but I didn't like to, at least in sooner mend it. That's what I say. You're doubtless wise. Can you give me any instances how Mrs. Mercado showed her feelings? So she mentioned Mrs. Mlidener's first marriage, said Pyro thoughtfully. I told him about her conversation on the roof. She mentioned about Mrs. Leidner's first marriage, said Pyro thoughtfully. Can you remember in mentioning it, did she look at you as though she wondered whether you had heard a different version? You think she have known the truth about it? It is a possibility. She may have written those letters and engineered a tapping hand and all the rest of it. मिसेस मर्कादो ने लेटर्स लिखे हो सकते हैं और टैपिंग हैंड वगैरह जो है लिखा सकता है. I wondered the same kind myself. It seemed the kind of petty, revengeful things you might do. Yes, a cruel streak, I should say, but hardly the temperament for cold-blooded, brutal murder, unless, of course. He paused and then said, "It is odd that curious thing she said to you. I know why you're here." What did she mean by it? मतलब उसने बोला, मिसेस मर्कादो ने बोला, अम्मा सुन रही हो? मिसेस लाइडनर से बोला था कि तुम, मुझे पता है कि तुम क्यों. अम्मा, अम्मा, उठ जाओ मम्मा, ये क्या है? I can't imagine, I said frankly. She thought you were there for some ulterior reason apart from the declared one. What reason? And why should she be so concerned in the matter? Or to the way you tell me she stared at you as though through the tea the day you arrived. सुन रही हो? Well, she's not a lady, Makil Paro, I said primly. That matter is an excuse, not an explanation. I wasn't sure for a minute what he meant, but he went on quickly. And the other members of the staff, I considered. I don't think Miss Johnson liked Mrs. Leidner either very much, but she was quite open and above board about it. She as good as admitted she was prejudiced, you see. She is very devoted to Dr. Leidner and has worked with him for years, of course. Marriage does change things and there is no denying it. मतलब मिसेस जॉनसन भी जो थी ना, वो बहुत पसंद नहीं करती थी लाइडनर को. मिस्टर लाइडनर के साथ वो काफ़ी दिनों तक काम कर रही थी. Yes, said Para. In Miss Johnson's point of view, it would be an unsuitable marriage. It would really have been much more suitable if Dr. Leidner had married her. Miss Johnson wanted Dr. Leidner to marry Miss Johnson. It would really, I agree. But there's a man all over. Not one in 100 considers suitability. And one can't really blame Dr. Leidner. Miss Johnson's poor suit isn't so much to look at. Miss Johnson जो बहुत सुंदर नहीं है, बस ये है. Now, Mrs. Leidner was really beautiful, not young, of course, but oh, I wish you had known her. There was something about her. I remember Mr. Coleman telling that she was like Thing Jummy Jig that came to lure people into the marshes. That wasn't a very good way of putting about it, but would you laugh at me? But there was something about her that was really well unearthly. चलो मैं जाता हूँ सो जाओ माँ ये तो खराब हो रहा है मामा चलो मैं जाता हूँ सो जाओ
नहीं करो आप सो नहीं रहे पढ़ रहे आप सुन रहे
She could cast a spell, yes, I understand, said Poirot. Then I don't think she and Mr. Carey got on very well either, I went on. I have an idea he was jealous just like Miss Johnson. He was always very stiff with her, and so she was with him. You know, she passed him things, he was very polite and called him Mr. Carey rather formally. He was an old friend of her husband's, of course, and some women can't stand their husband's old friends. They like to think that anyone knew them before they did. At least that's quite muddled way of putting it. The कैरी को भी पसंद नहीं करते थे क्योंकि कैरी जो था पुराना दोस्त था उनका. I quite understand. And the three young men, Coleman, you say, are inclined to be poetic about her? I couldn't help her. It was funny, Makepara, I saw. He's much a fact he met a young man. Kerry है fact मतलब जैसा है वैसा है. And the other two? I don't really know about Mr. Emmett. He's always so quiet and never says much. He was very nice. She was very nice to him always, you know. Friendly, called him David and used to tease him about Miss Reilly and other things like that. तो मिस रेली को पसंद करता था ना डेविड को तो एमट जो था तो वो खूब वो मिसेस लाइडना जो थी उसको टीज वीज करती थी ठीक है ना really and did he enjoy that I don't quite know I said doubtfully he just looked at her rather funnily you could tell that he was thinking and Mr. Writer she wasn't very kind to him I said slowly I think he got on his nerves she used to say quite sarcastic things to him. And did he mind? He used to get very pink, poor boy. Of course, she didn't mean to be unkind. Interesting. And then suddenly, from feeling a little sorry for the boy, it came over to me. He was very likely a cold-blooded murderer that had been playing the part all the time. Oh, Michael Poirot exclaimed. What do you think really happened? He shook his head slowly and thoughtfully. Tell me, he said, you're not afraid to go back there tonight? Oh, no, I said. Of course, I remembered what you said, but who would want to murder me? I do not think anyone could, he said slowly. That is partly why I've been so anxious to hear all you have to tell me. No, I think I'm sure you are quite safe. तुम काफ़ी safe हो है ना तुम्हें कोई murder नहीं करेगा. If anyone had told me in Baghdad, I began to doubt. Did you hear any gossip about the Leidners and the expedition before you came here? He asked. I told him about Mrs. Leidner's nickname and just a little when Mrs. Kelsey had said about her. In the middle, the door opened and Miss Reilly came in. She had been playing tennis and had a racket in her hand. I gathered Poirot had already met her and when she arrived in Hasana. She said, how do you do to me in her usual offhand manner and picked up a sandwich. Well, Michael Poirot, she said, how are you getting on with the local mystery? Not very fast, mademoiselle. I see you've rescued the nurse from the wreck. Nurse Lithran has been giving me valuable information about the various members of the expedition. अलग अलग information जो थी वो बता रही थी. Incidentally, I've learned a good deal about the victim, and the victim, mademoiselle, is very often clue to the mystery. Miss Reilly said, that's rather clever of you, Mercule Poirot. It's certainly true that even if a woman deserved to be murdered, Miss Ledner was that woman. चला कल पढ़ेंगे माँ तुम सो रही हो माँ चलो,
हम भी तो रहे पढ़ो पढ़ो तो
तो मिस रेली ने कहा कि भाई अगर किसी का मर्डर होना चाहिए था
हाँ
तो मिस लेंडर का होना चाहिए था. Miss Really, I cried at scandalized. She laughed a short, nasty laugh. Ah, she said, I thought you hadn't been hearing quite the truth. Nastya, then I'm afraid she was quite taken in, like many other people. Do you know, Mr. Pyro, I rather hope that this case isn't going to be one of your successes. I'd quite like the murder of Louis Lesnar to get away with it. In fact, I would rather have much of object to putting her out of the way myself. I was simply disgusted with the girl. Miracle Paro, I must say, didn't turn a hair. He just bowed and said quite pleasantly, I hope then you have done alibi for yesterday afternoon. कल आफ्टरनून का आपके पास कुछ alibi है कि आप कहाँ थी?
कहेगा
Alibi का मतलब ये होगा कि तुम कहाँ थी परसों कल तुम. There was a moment silent and Miss Rayleigh's racket went clattering down to the floor. She didn't bother to pick up, slack and untidy like her all sort. She said in a rather breathless voice, Oh yes, I was playing tennis at the club, but seriously, Mercure Paro, I wonder if you know anything about Mrs. Lyla and the kind of woman she was. Again she made a funny little bow and said, You shall inform me, Madrasa. She hesitated a minute, then spoke with callousness and lack of decency that really sickened me. There's a convention that one doesn't speak ill of the dead. That's stupid, I think. The truth's always the truth. On the whole, it's better to keep your mouth shut about living people. You might conceivably injure them. The dead are past that. भाई मरे हुए लोगों के बारे में बोल दो भाई क्या प्रॉब्लम है और जो लिविंग के बारे में चुप रहो बिकॉज वो जिंदा है. But the harm they have done lies after them sometimes. Not quite the quotation from Shakespeare, but very nearly. Has nurse told you of the queer atmosphere there was at Tel Ramja? Has she told you how jumpy they all were? And how they all used to glare at each other like enemies? There was That was Louis Ledner's doing. When I was a kid out there 3 years ago, they were the happiest, jolliest lot imaginable. तो वहाँ पे थे तो they were very happy, jolly lot थे. Even last year they were pretty well all right. But this year there was a blight over them, and it was her doing. She was the kind of woman who won't let anyone else be happy. There are women like that, and she was one of them. She wanted to break up things always just for fun, and for the sense of power, or perhaps because she was made that way. And she was the kind of woman who could get hold of every male creature within the reach. Miss Rayleigh cried, I don't think that's true. In fact, I know it isn't. She went on without taking the least on. It wasn't enough for her to have her husband adore her. She had to make a fool of that long-legged, shambling idiot called of a Mercado. Then she got hold of Bill. Bill's a sensible cub, but she was getting him all mazed and bewildered. Carl Reiter, she just amused herself by tormenting. It was easy. He's a sensitive boy, and she had a jolly good go at David. David was better sport to her because he put up a fight. He felt her charm, but he wasn't having any. I think because she'd got some sense enough to know that she didn't really care a damn. That's why I hate her so. She's not sensual. She doesn't want affairs. It's just cold-blooded experiment on her part and the fun of stirring up people and setting them against each other. She dabbled in that too. She's the sort of woman who has never had a row with anyone in her life, but rows always happen where she is. She makes them happen. She's the kind of a female Ilago. She must have drama, but she doesn't always want to be involved in herself. She's always outside pulling strings, looking on, enjoying it. Or do you see that all? What I mean? I see perhaps more than you know, Mademoiselle said Poirot. I couldn't make his word out, but he didn't sound indignant. He sounded, oh well, I can't explain it. Sheila really seemed to understand, for she flushed all over her face. चलो मैं कल पढ़ते हैं तुम सो जाओ।